Welcome to episode 336 of the DFO Rundown, presented by Fountain Tire. And remember, you can save up to $225 on a select 4 tires, including Goodyear, up until December 14th. Easiest way to do it, stop in at Fountain Tire, go to fountaintire.com. And remember, they're more than just tire. They also have auto service. So if you have a little rattle in the engine, it can help you out there as well. It's Fountain Tire. I'm Jason Greger. We welcome in Frank Saravalli, who just wrapped up. There was a GM meetings after the Hall of Fame. And so the GM meetings come down. Frank, sometimes there's a whole lot of nothing. Other times there's a few interesting tidbits to discuss. I doubt that goal review was on it. Maybe we'll talk about that later.
But, it was actually. We can talk about that after.
So yeah, we'll talk about that after. But what stood out for you as maybe the most interesting or hottest topic at the GM meetings?
Well, the interesting thing is the GMs actually, after the meeting wrapped and most of the media went home, I flew back to Philly. They actually got together, just had a little get together that night, dinner, some cocktails, and spent a lot of time sitting around and talking. And one of the big things that was the topic of conversation during the meeting and then after was this idea that, hey, CBA talks are right on the heels of the new year. And the league and the NHL Players Association, I think we're all holding our breath, hoping that they can find a way to achieve some labor peace long before the CBA expires and get an extension done. But what is on the wish list of the NHL from a hockey side and from a managing the game side? I'm not talking about the business aspects of the game, but that's what the NHL asked its general managers on Tuesday. What would you like to see different? And start gathering your talking points and get them to us in priority order so that we can begin to shape this. So what exactly does that mean? We're talking about potential contract term limits. We're talking about LTI and reimagining that, LTIR. We're talking about, do we need a salary cap in the playoffs? What does the next regular season schedule look like, assuming that we eliminate or shorten significantly the preseason? Probably going to be an 84 game schedule, but would you like the matrix to remain similar? How many times you play teams in your division, et cetera, et cetera. And then you can get into the minutia. But since this was a topic of conversation over the last 48 hours, my question to you, Jay, is if you were an NHL GM, would you want, and I know you've made this case from the player's perspective, but would you want shortened contracts, term limits?
Oh, 100%. I honestly believe it works best for both parties. I outlined before like you're closing in on almost 75 million of dead cap space for buyouts for players who aren't in the league. And so that's money that active players, they're not getting. That's a lot of money. And so most of it comes from buyouts on longer term deals. Right. I'm not talking LTIR. So like there's guys like Carey Price and stuff. They're on LTIR. So they don't impact the current pool of players. And what I look at it at twofold. So the GMs, there's less errors there. And I've always said this, 5-year terms after the age of 28. If you want to sign your young guys coming out of their ELC to 8-year deals, I have no problem with it. The odds of those ones crushing you, very low. Very rare is a guy bought out of that. It's the 28 and 29-year-old non-elite player who gets 8 years or 7 years. And you're like, what are you doing? And most of those players, Frank, I know they'll argue, well, we get to keep the AAV lower. Well, it shouldn't be that high anyway. They're not elite. So whether it's, 7 million over 8 years, put it over 5. It's not like it should be 8. There's no reason. And so the players themselves, I know they'll say, hey, I'm getting long-term security. And for the small percentage that do, I always argue this. If you're good enough in 5 years, you'll get another contract. It shouldn't be, well, you know what? I'm good enough now, and I'm probably going to really tail off those last 3 years of my career, but I get security from it. Like it does not help the collective group of players. And once they understand that, it'll be better. And I think it starts with guys like when your elite players take shorter term deals, then it just trickles down. But and so if Austin Matthews and Connor McDavid, et cetera, are signing 5-year deals, I think it works twofold. They still get maximum for the best players, just like in the NBA, but also it's the trickle down effect, and it forces teams to stay competitive. So when their elite guys come up in 5 years, they're still in a situation where they'll want to stay in their market.
I don't know if I could disagree with you more on just about every front. And I'm not doing that to play devil's advocate, but I don't think GMs should universally want shorter term limits because of exactly what you just talked about. Every team, just like every person, is in a different financial situation. I go to the car dealer. Some people pay cash for their car. Some people take out a loan. Some people are cool with 36 months. Some people want 84. It all depends on your current situation. A team in Stanley Cup mode that has players that they want to keep that are willing to trade and mortgage part of their future and pay a longer, higher price in order to do it, and are willing to accept the consequences to manage whatever happens later. Meaning, hey, if I need to trade this guy, if I need to use picks to trade this guy later for years 6, 7, 8 of this contract, I need him in the first 5 years of this deal to be down at this AAV instead of a higher one. And I understand what you're saying about truly elite or non-elite players. I totally couldn't agree more. And in some cases, term limits make sense because you save a whole chunk of GMs from themselves. However, the option to do that and push out the term and lower the AAV should still be on the table for teams in certain situations that want to do it. Why remove that flexibility and functionality for what?
Okay, so
what do you so let me change the viewpoint too. I know that you said that you think players, it's better for them in the long run, and you might be right. Let's get to the next negotiation point as soon as possible. However, as a whole, the NHL Players Association is not going to be for this. So for GMs, it's we're losing functionality and flexibility to fight something that the PA is not going to want. Does that make any sense moving forward?
Okay, so when we say the PA doesn't want it, do you know how many players in the NHL currently have a contract 6 years longer that was signed at the age of 28 or older? Right? Like it's good. It's less than 100. It's probably closer to 50.
But there's no way that they're gonna put the caveat in that you did, which is what I agree with, which is anyone 28 or younger, those guys are eligible, but you're gonna take it off the table for others. There's no way they're gonna go for that.
Maybe not. Or the easy way around it then is to have each team gets 2 players that they can sign, right? Because honestly, once you get past that, how many other guys are there that you really want to sign for 6, 7, 8 year deals? And you know what? Once you put the new rule in place, I don't think it's going to matter that much. Like you'd look, okay, Colorado wants it. Now they might be tough because they've got Makar and Rantanen and McKinnon. That's fine. But at the time of their signing, then it's got a little bit of timing. So you look and say, hey, who do we want? Who do we value more? And if 2 guys get 8, the guy who gets 5, if it's a rare team who has 3 elite players, one of those guys would automatically get a shorter term deal, which means he's probably going to cash in more. Like look at Austin Matthews. Austin Matthews compared to Connor McDavid. Austin Matthews has maximized his career financially more than Connor McDavid. His choice.
But he's jammed up the Toronto Maple Leafs in the meantime.
But you think he got higher?
So, like, let's compare though. Like, it's great that you make the point, and for earning potential, sure. But A, you have to be the super elite of the elite to be able to command that, and B, you're jerking your team around. I don't care what anyone says. which team has a better opportunity for success, the McDavid deal or the Matthews deal? It's not close. The Matthews deal's plural.
Yeah, but think about it. Matthews himself benefited from a shorter term deal. He's
100%.
proving my point. For the players,
course
why
he
do they
did.
hate it?
I'm not trying to hate. What I'm saying is those guys are the exception, not the rule. What we're talking about are a ton of players that are in the 8-year range at $8 million a year that all of a sudden their earning potential might be limited based on the time that they can get to their next contract. All I'm saying is, why would you like it's not a hill for either side worth dying on. That's my only point here.
That might be, but it's more so. I can show you all you gotta do is look at the NBA. And the proof is in the pudding. Is it most people don't like change, so they'll look at the negative rather than the positive of it. And again, it's such a small percentage of the PA that it actually impacts. The majority would be like, well, yeah, we could vote this in because it's going to more positively impact me than negatively impact me.
I get what you're saying. I understand the math and the dynamics. I'm just saying if I'm a GM in that chair, it's the idea of it is great, but I think losing the flexibility of it is not ideal. I wouldn't be for
it. I look at these guys, like how many players who are on these deals who are long-term sign way lower AAVs. That's the thing. I don't think they do. So like at 8-year, like these 7-8-year deal guys, like who are they? Who are some guys who signed? They were like, wow, he should have got 7, but he only signed for 5.5. How many of them? Like, I honestly don't believe there's many. Like people in Edmonton will say Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. And I'm like, what? Well, like he had one great year. He's a 70-point player, 65-point player. He's more of a power play guy. Like, you know, he's taken 5.5 at his career and his numbers are slowly dwindling. I don't think so. Right. Zach Hyman, good contract for it. Now, Zach Hyman no one thought even him when he signed, he was going to be a 54 goal scorer. So a lot of people think, hey, his contract was probably decent.
But look how there's plenty of other examples of long-term deals that were signed at age 28 that ended up being great for both for team. Let me
now, are they elite? Are they the elite players?
Do you think Brad Marchand is an elite player?
He's right on the cusp. Yeah.
Yeah. I would put him in the elite category. 8-year deal signed at age 28. $49 million. Unbelievable value for the Boston Bruins at 6.125.
Yeah.
If for Brad Marchand, if the term limit was 5 years, would he have gotten a second better contract? Yes. And to your point, yes. But if you're the Bruins, you're laughing for 6 of those 8 years going, this has been unbelievable. My only point is exactly that. Why, if you want to, let's say you go out today and you buy a house. If you're fortunate enough to pay for it in cash, good for you. But if not, instead of having just a 3-year, 6-year, 10-year option on the table for mortgages, wouldn't you want 3, 6, 10, 15, 25, and 30? Wouldn't you want the whole span of options in front of you to be able to deal from? I don't understand from a GM's perspective the idea of wanting to limit it. I really don't. They're going to your point, if players are going to make out better, that means that teams are going to end up paying more in the long run.
In some cases, but in lots of the other cases, they won't. And so, like I said, if you want to put in a caveat that each team gets 2, I'd be fine with that. Then the teams have nothing to argue about. The players overall, again, now you're talking 64 players in the league who can have 6 to 8-year deals after the age of 28. There's not more than that right now anyway. So I really don't think it's limiting it that much at all. All it does is it saves players, and there's a very small percentage of players who are in that middle gray area who get the 6 to 8-year deals and they get grossly overpaid. And there's way more of those than there are Brad Marchands. I think we would agree with that. There's way more guys on the other side who are teams are like, oh my God, like, you know, Buffalo just bought out Jeff Skinner. You know, you look at Neil, you look at Lucic, you go down the list of those guys. There is a Brad Marchand, great. but there's way more Kyle Okpozos and others on the other end. And those are the ones that hurt the teams because they don't get the production. Then they have to buy them out. Now it's dead cap space. It's not really helping those championship teams, to be honest. If you sign them for 5-year deals, term is what crushes teams. Always has, always will. Because if you're smarter and you pay your guys who are producing more, you don't care because they're producing. It's the guys on term that aren't producing and then just suck you dry. And that's what crushes teams.
Yeah, I just think here's my prediction. As much as it's an interesting talking point, I don't think it makes sense for either side.
Yeah, I think I do think it makes a lot of sense if both sides take the time to look at the whole picture and not just pick out Brad Marchand worked.
He's literally the first guy I scrolled to on Puckpedia. I literally opened the page, first guy with an 8-year deal, first guy at age 28. And I'm like, what an absolute boon for the Bruins.
Oh yeah, no, that one worked, right? Like, look at early on.
I didn't have to search is my point. I didn't sit here and was like, oh my God, what am I going to say to Jason? I don't know. It's the first guy that I came to.
Okay, sure. But I can tell you, Erik Karlsson, Jonathan Huberdeau, Tyler Seguin, Jamie Benn. We go down the list of guys, really good players, but they're not close to living up to their contracts in the final years of those deals. There's way more of them.
That wasn't the point. The point was to get them to 8 years so that the first few years when they were living up to those contracts, hopefully that the team got them on a lower AAV. The point was never to pay.
But do you think at the time he signed that Jamie Benn, if he signed for 5 years, would have gotten $1.5 million more?
Yes. Yeah, because at the end of the day for the player, it's all about as much security as you can get your hands on. And that's the part that I think you're missing.
Yeah, but from the players, sure, I get why the players do it. But I'm just saying, if the rules are in place, now everybody understands it. And the overall collective, they say they actually have more players making money because there's more active money in the pot for everybody else. Okay. And there's less. And those teams who want to win, they actually have a better chance because now they have less dead cap space. And when I say dead cap space, you have a guy making $9 million who's only a $4 million player, even though it's not considered dead cap space in the term of a buyout. To me, that's dead cap space.
Okay, let's move on and talk about another topic that was on the list. Okay. How would you manage LTIR in relation to the playoffs?
Yeah, that's a good question. To me, now I know it's not as cut and dry to suggest that. I think it's easy. You can say your game day roster in the playoffs, which gives you an advantage because teams are allowed 23-man roster in the regular season. On the playoffs, it's only a 20. I'm just talking the game day, that evening's roster of 20 players.
You're saying just 20 players.
Just 20 players. The 20 players playing a game in the playoffs has to be regular season cap compliant, right? Now, if you acquire a guy like Noah Hannafin last year and his cap hit that you acquired was $1.4 million, that's what he counts for, right? His whole regular season isn't the cap hit because because you had cap space to acquire him at the deadline and he counted as 1.4, 1.6, whatever it is. So that's what he counts for in the playoffs, right? To me, that makes sense.
Why do it that way?
Well, because otherwise, if you went back to that, now Noah Hannafin, if you went for his full cap hit of the whole year, suddenly he's a $6.5 million player. Well, that's
the entire. So you're saying because they had a double retained transaction?
Yeah, because at the deadline, you made it work under the salary cap rules.
But that's not true because I'm not saying that specific instance, but that's not normally what teams do because they use LTIR to wedge players in even at closer to full boat.
No, but I'm saying, so when you use your 20-man roster, guys, if you want to activate Mark Stone, let's say it's an easy one at 9.5. And for the record, Vegas, when they won the cup, their 20-game roster was salary cap compliant. I just want to point that out to everybody who complains about them cheating. If you actually look at their roster when they won, it was cap compliant. So now, based on the roster that game, their overall number wasn't. And so that's why, to me, because I think there are cases where guys are legitimately injured, right? I don't discount they're injured. Now, do they save them a week and delay it to come back? Probably. But that's abiding by the rules. There's nothing in the rules that says you're cheating. Everybody always screams, don't rush a player back. Don't rush a player back. But then a week before the playoffs, well, rush him back because that means they're screwing us over on the cap, right? So you can't necessarily have it both ways. But to me, if you make your 20-man roster, and I talked to a capologist about it, he says, well, if we acquire a guy And we slid them under our cap because when we acquire them, we're only paying the last 38, 42, whatever days left.
That can't be the case though. It should be whatever the players, because what you end up having is then special circumstances that allow for that, whether double retained or like, it should just be player at his face value of the contract in your lineup that night. You have to be cap compliant.
Yeah, you could do it. And probably in most cases, it would still be cap compliant for a lot of teams, right? And that's not giving you a massive advantage because let's be honest, the 21st, 22nd, and 23rd guys on most NHL rosters are making league minimum. So it's about 2.5 million. But it saves the teams who have really, if you're worried about hiding someone with a high cap hit, because you're not going to do it on a low cap hit, let's be real, right? No one's caring about, hey, fourth line guy making 800 grand. Geez, he was on LTIR, Frank, all year, and then he got activated by the playoffs. No one's talking about those guys, right? We all know
because
who
you
we're
can
talking
fit them in anyway without having to do any maneuvering.
So it's only going to have to be at a high-end salary guy, right? And or the other way is he's got to play. If he doesn't play in the final few weeks, whatever, he's not eligible. But then again, I don't know if I love that rule. People have talked about it because what if a guy's legitimately hurt? And we know that come playoffs, guys play hurt more than they would in the regular season. We know that. So if you're a team that says, okay, Bob has been twisted his ankle, sprained his ankle, he's out for 3 weeks, and it's 2.5 weeks. He doesn't play in the regular final season games, but he's going to gut it out in the playoffs. I don't know if you can, and if they were cap compliant before, then it shouldn't be a problem. That's irrelevant.
But you know what would solve a lot of that is just being transparent with medical reports. Why is it that the NFL can do it, the most gambled on sport in the world, and yet we hide under cloak and dagger of, upper and lower body and just absolutely making it up at times? Well, like Brock Besser appears to be clearly concussed.
Yeah.
The Canucks are calling it upper body.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. I agree with you there. But here's the thing. So when Mark Stone, because it's the easiest example, it's the one's talked about. When Mark Stone was injured, I don't think anyone questions his actual injury, right? They question.
No, they question the timeline. So give us, at the moment that the injury occurs, give us the timeline. And yeah, things happen where you can come back. But if you vastly exceed the timeline, or if you appear to be maneuvering it, that's fine. Mark Stone can come back, but he has to sit out the entire first round. I'm just giving it like I'm just, and I don't think they'll never do that. They'll never get to a place where it's subjective. But if part of this does come back to injury, you got to be more transparent with it.
Yeah, well, that part I don't disagree with. You could have what the NFL has. Remember guys who are on IR and then they open up their 3-week window. That tells you when they're coming back. But I look at the easiest way to do it for the NHL would just be there is essentially still a salary cap in the playoffs, but we're giving you some wiggle room, and it only has to be for your 20-man roster for the game. That to me is the easiest way around it.
I could be on board with that.
Right? Because it's fair for everybody. Everybody looks, okay, let's count cap hit. And if you don't want to do the prorated one, sure. Now I'd have to go back and look, does that screw teams over or not? Because I do think that's valid. If you acquire a guy based on the percentage of cap that you're paying, it allows you to do it. That suddenly over a full year, it would look more. So and the capologist was the guy who brought that up, and he's in favor of it, but he just said, I would be in favor of it with this caveat. And that made sense to me. So, but I'd be all for it. I still don't think it's as big of an issue as we think when you look at historically. We haven't seen teams like, I know people will mention Tampa Bay and Kucherov, and hey, it's a shortened season of 56.
It'll never happen again, but still, that to me was the biggest and most egregious one we've seen. Well, not the most egregious, but it's definitely the biggest one that we've seen so far.
Yeah, and just you could argue smart timing, but here's the other thing: it's pretty special.
That's it. Smart timing. It was the season ended in September. Waiting until December to have
October,
surgery,
right? It wasn't October 4th.
Sorry, October. Waiting 60+ days to have surgery, knowing by that point when you did it and had surgery how long the season would be. they totally gamed it. And I refuse to accept any other acknowledgement that that's not what happened.
Or did he try? Did he try to rehab it first?
No one has ever said that. No one has ever even
Okay.
made the claim or pretended to say that that happened.
Yeah. But in some cases, a player will, is my point. Like
Yeah.
surgery isn't always the first choice for a player's health, right? If they
Look
can
at
rehab
Evander
it
Kane.
without surgery.
Evander Kane's the best example. How long did Evander Kane wait now? He didn't
Yeah.
have surgery right away. He wanted,
No.
I think his preference was to try and rehab it.
Yeah. And he tried and it didn't work. So, but I'd be all for it. Do I think like the NHL moves glacier slow? They're very hesitant.
Or is it that these are all CBA negotiated things and it's a while before the next one comes up?
Not that. Yeah. Well, what is it? A year and a bit?
2026 is officially when it expires.
So, yeah. Well, you heard both sides saying they'd like to get it done beforehand, which that's got to be music to. And like I'll tell you right now, there should never be another lockout. There's never a reason. It's so asininely idiotic that it became a trend in the NHL.
Well, but there's a couple responses to that. Let's see what's on the players' wish list. We don't know that yet. And we don't know officially what's on the NHL's wish list from a business perspective. So it's great to talk about all the other stuff, the minutia of the CBA, which I think is interesting and impacts teams and fans. But the players are on their fall tour right now. Marty Walsh he hit markets 15 and 16 this week out of 32, Salt Lake and Dallas. So they're crossing off teams, but he needs his marching orders before they can even begin discussions. He needs to find out what's important to them. And we still don't know what the NHL itself is asking for. Yeah. It's been significant adjustments in revenue to the point of going from 57% down to 50% for players has earned NHL owners an additional $4.3 billion in the last 10 years. Yeah. So if you want to say lockouts are asinine, which I would agree, we don't need them. But if you're an owner and you've watched player salaries be significantly cost controlled, you've watched franchise valuations skyrocket, you keep all the money from expansion fees, and you got an additional $4.3 billion over the last 10 years by just skipping half of a season, 26 games. I would do that every single time to get the additional $4.3 billion, because here's the other thing that has been proven. Fans come back.
So, but Frank, here's my question. What do the players gain from sitting out the full year? What do they ultimately gain?
Nothing. They don't have the stomach for it. I think this generation of players has even less of a stomach for it because they know that they're not going to win.
Yeah. Well, and they're millionaires. They're making tons of money. Like all that money they lost from the 05 lockout, that's just money gone. You could have played right then. Hey, we're never having a salary cap. What did they end up with? A salary cap.
But put yourself in the shoes of an owner. Would you lock out the players if necessary for 26 games to get yourself an additional $4.3 billion?
Well, they would. But my point was the Players Association, I felt, they erred in their approach, because you could have just accepted it, Frank. They still would have made lots of money. Yeah,
they could have just accepted the 57 to 50 revenue change last time. Yeah. The NHL initially proposed 57 to 43, and they sawed it off at 50-50. That's probably what it was always going to be anyway. Could have saved themselves a lot of trouble that year.
Mm-hmm. So,
but let's see what the ask is.
Yeah, I do wonder though if fans eventually reach a point of spending fatigue in the NHL. I always wonder.
They don't seem to have spending fatigue in the NFL, Major League Baseball, or NBA.
Yeah, but ticket prices in a lot of those markets, Frank, aren't close. Like, how much does it cost to go to a Philly Eagles game?
Well, I mean, it depends on
it depends on what. But if you're sitting you want to sit in a really
have
good
the season tickets, or are you buying them on the secondary market?
Yeah, wow, having the season tickets.
Yeah, you're spending $400 for a pair of tickets.
Yeah, per game.
Yeah. If you have this, if you don't, you're spending 1,000.
Okay, but that's 9 times, right? 8 times a year, depending. 9 one year, 8 the next. You're doing that 41 times in NHL
well,
market.
There's a couple differences here in play. One, there's such a wider market of people willing to buy the tickets because the sport is that much more popular. And two, when you look at it from an NFL perspective, it's not to say that their gate revenue is irrelevant, but it kind of is.
No, I agree with you. Yeah.
That's not what is driving business for the NHL. That is still part of it's driving. 56% of business is gate revenue.
No. Well, and you've seen some teams in certain markets, Frank, lower their ticket prices. We've seen it, right? Tyler just texted in. Eagles game is $132 a ticket. The Flyers game, cheapest one, is $30. Now you have 5 times as many games, so there's that.
You also have a first place team and
100%.
a last place team. There's a million factors in play. My point is, the NFL. Part of the reason they're spending fatigue is because it's the same 20,000 people in each. And I'm being facetious, but in the U.S., it's the same very small core fan base that's getting hammered. In football, it's like you've got infinite numbers of people that want to go to a game.
And the other thing the NFL has done, Frank, they spread out their TV revenue. And I think that's the thing, their TV rights that the NHL, if they were smart, does on the next
They've already done that.
Yeah, in the States, but not in Canada. And I think it's coming. Like, I know they this year, now they have Amazon on Mondays, but I think that's the next step.
You also have to have interested parties. Like, I'm not.
You don't think TSN and Sportsnet would have done it the last time? They should have.
No, they wouldn't. They refused to do it. They talked to each other about even doing it at midway points of the deal. Yeah. But I think the response from TSN or whoever wanted to get in was, hey, we want part of the Stanley Cup final. We don't want a dumpy package just to take the load off your plate. If you're suffering, suffer alone. That's on you.
It just should have been the league should have looked and said, geez, what's that NFL doing that really works? Let's try to take some of their ideas. That's all. Let's bring in Tyler Remchuk for Fill in the Blank.
What's up, boys? Back with a new edition of Fill in the Blank, which, as always, is brought to you by Bet365. Download the app today and use the promo code NATION to get in on a huge range of markets. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. I want to start with this one, and I'll give you the odds in a second up from Bet365, but it dawned on me the other day, we're always so mean to coaches as a collective at this point of the year. We're talking about who's going to get fired. Will anyone get fired? So I decided to be nice. Your quarter-way Jack Adams winner is blank. Frank, which coach do you think is doing just a bang-up job?
Spencer Carberry.
Ooh, I like that.
Scott Arniel. It's hard to go from an assistant coach to a head coach and to have the greatest start in NHL history. Come on.
Who do you think is the odds-on favorite over at Bet365 out of the whole coaching collective?
Odds-on favorite.
Sheldon Keefe.
I'll still go with Arniel.
It is Scott Arniel plus 350. Spencer Carberry comes in at second. Sheldon Keefe is actually fourth on the list at 16-1 for our friends at Bet.
Who's third?
John Hines is actually third on that list in Minnesota, which is actually a decent shout. Minnesota, they've exceeded my expectations of them at least early on. If you want to take the biggest long shot, you can get 1,000-1 odds on Ryan Warsofsky of the San Jose Sharks to win Coach of the Year. But they're always updating the odds boards over at Bet365 for the individual player and coaches awards for the year.
Can I just chime in quickly? One underrated part of the start of the Jets from a coaching perspective has been the addition of 2 new assistant coaches. I talked about that with Kevin Cheveldayoff on Frankly Speaking, which dropped yesterday, about their start. 2 new voices, 2 fresh perspectives. Marty Johnston is the one guy that ended up staying. So it's 2 from the previous staff and 2 new ones. I think when you look at a totally new offense and a power play that's been unbelievable, adding in some of those new voices for a roster that didn't really change, that to me is the big difference.
Let's talk a little bit about players getting to 1,000 points. Connor McDavid is sitting at 999 as the Oilers get set to take on the Nashville Predators tonight. But there are actually 4 other active players who are above 900, and there's one other who is right there. Nikita Kucherov's at 896, and then the other active players sitting above 900 are Corey Perry, okay, Jamie Benn, Nathan McKinnon's up at 932 though, and Brad Marchand's at 942. So I think those are kind of your big three: Kucherov, McKinnon, and Marchand. Blank will hit the 1,000 point mark this year, Frank.
2. I'm gonna say Nikita Kucherov, which is probably the boldest one, that he will get 104 additional points on top of the 23 that he already has. But he did have 144 last year. So I say Kucherov closes the gap, 104 additional points this season to get to 1,000. And I'll go. Ooh, you know, it's funny because the Bruins people have been highly critical of the Bruins, and remember how slow of a start Marchand got off to. He does have 13 points in 17 games, so like it's really not out of the realm of possibility that he could get another 58. But I mean, I think McKinnon is kind of a lock. No.
Oh yeah, no. McKinnon is stone cold more lock. The question is, can McKinnon? He's played 808 games. Can he beat Evgeny Malkin, who did it in 848 games? So he needs to get that. What,
68 points in 48 games?
40 games.
40 games.
Yeah. Like kind of is on that pace. So that's the one to watch. And here's the crazy part about McKinnon. When he gets to his 1,000 point, he's going to do it in about 190 more games than Connor McDavid.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look at the starts of their careers. McKinnon's first few years, 63, 38, 52, 53. I mean, that's going to sink your chances to be on that kind of trajectory.
Yeah. I'm going to say, actually, I think all three. Marchand has started to heat up here a little bit. The last 2 seasons, he scored 7 points. He needed 71 at the start of the season to get there. So I'm going to say all three.
Yeah, I think all three would probably be the favorite if you were to setting odds onto it. You don't think Marchand can get there?
No, well, Marchand and Kucherov, for both of them, have to go on pretty good runs.
Yeah, it's Marchand is the outlier here to me.
Okay.
But Jay, I don't think McKinnon can get there before Malkin.
No, it would be hard, but
he's at 1.68 points per game now, and that puts him on pace for 154. He would need to play the next 40 games at 1.7, which is closer to 160 point pace. It's not impossible, but I'd say hard. It's very unlikely.
Yeah, he might beat Ovi then, because Ovi did it in 880. So
you guys are fully writing off Leon Draisaitl's chances of getting 130 more points this year?
Yeah, I don't think so. Now, funny about Brad, though, the orders tonight they'll become the 6th team in NHL to have 4 guys score 1,000 points for their franchise.
Oh yeah, you're saying tonight they will?
Yeah, pretty certain Connor McDavid's getting a point tonight.
Okay.
Yeah. Buddy, that's the easiest bet ever. But you look at Boston. Who else is there? Boston's got 4. They're actually going to be the first team with 5 when Marchand does it. And then Edmonton, because next year Draisaitl will get to 1,000. They'll be the first 2 franchises with 5 guys to have 1,000 points in their franchise history.
You were mentioning the odds for Connor McDavid to get his 1,000th point tonight. Our friends at Bet365 have it at -600, which means you'd need to wager $600 just to win $100 on McDavid, and that's implied odds of 85.71%. So look reasonably confident.
So the play, of course, would then be, since he's already had 4 games this season where he doesn't have any points, what's the odds for him to not get a point tonight?
Oh,
you could bet that it's like playing the don't pass line at the crap stable, the absolute douche hammer move.
So they don't have under 1 point. All they have is under 1.5 points. So
Come on.
We're not even offering it, Frank.
What is this, NHL edge tracking where you don't get to see the bad stuff?
Yeah,
we should be able to know who the slowest player in the NHL is. They should be able to tell us. But instead, we just get you're under 50th percentile.
Yeah. Okay, last one for you
Well,
guys.
Frank, couldn't you technically go to every individual player if you wanted one by one, because it does show their top speed? Like if you go to
Yeah, I
each
mean,
individual,
if you want to click through 708 players and
Yeah,
put them in a database, I
well,
mean,
I'm just saying, if you
could.
wanted to find it, you
But
could.
that's only their top speed, though.
Right. Yeah. So who has the slowest top speed?
But like, we're all adults here. Like, let's just like put two guys next to each other. This guy ranks 708th. This guy ranks first. It's okay. The last person in any medical school is still called a doctor at the end of the day.
Can you
I mean-
imagine being a player who sits down for his arbitration and the team is like, we can prove you are the slowest player in the NHL? And it's like,
But they-
damn you, NHL Edge.
They actually can, though, because each team has access to the raw, unfiltered data. So it's only the public that they're fooling.
Well, then. All right, last one.
That would be my play tonight, because McDavid getting 1,000 points in Toronto, that would be something.
Not happening.
How much does he not want to have to talk about that on Saturday in Toronto?
Well, as Leon Draisaitl said, Draisaitl said it before Tuesday's game, that he's like, yeah, I think he would like to avoid that. Now they'll still ask him questions about being a 1,000-point player, right? But honestly, McDavid, what has he got? He's got a 14-point game streak going against Nashville. He's got 39 points in his last 19 games against the Predators. Draisaitl's got 23 goals in 16 games. Trust me. McDavid has, the NHL sent it out earlier today, he has scored a point in the first 10 minutes in 6 of those 14 games. Like, mark it down, first period. Bet on the period he scores a point in tie. Because if you are anybody, go first period.
Or can you, I mean, I guess you could do first. You could also do first goal scorer too.
Yeah, first goal scorer is all I can find.
And what is that?
Plus 850.
That's actually...
That's the juice for Holly likes to lay.
Yeah, I mean, what, like, playing minus 600, like, even if you think it's a lock, like, it's
like taking the under. It sucks, but honestly, if you want to guarantee yourself money, that would be the one. It's still risky though, as Ty said. What, 87%?
I mean, you have to lay like $5,000 to get anything juicy. Like,
well, I don't think they would allow that, right? But most people tell me the sites wouldn't allow you to put that much.
You can bet on him plus 135 to get a power play point is actually probably the best of both worlds here, where it's safe.
What's he get to get 2 points? Plus what?
Minus 120. So you're not even getting plus money on 2 points tonight, which is pretty usual for Connor McDavid actually on the markets. Okay, Connor McDavid on the verge of getting 0.1000. It feels like a lock that he's going to be, health permitting, the second player to ever get to 2,000 points in the NHL. But I wanted to ask you guys, and listen, this will be a long time before we know if you're right or wrong. But if you were in charge of the books, what would you set for a career over/under for Connor McDavid for total points? So to give you guys like a baseline here, if he were to play 1,500 games, which is, I think, on the low end, but 1,500 games at his current pace, he would be at 2,277 career points. But if you guys had to like set a line of where you think McDavid ends up career points wise, where would you go, Greggs?
It's a great question. And I've crunched all the numbers. I think he'll be at 1,100 points at the end of the year. So
did you say 1,500 games?
Yep.
Dude, that's a lot of games.
It's a lot, but like, for example, Ovi, I looked at Ovi and I said, well, Ovi's at 1,441 and he's probably got like 1, 2 or more years after.
And McDavid started earlier.
Only 21 players in the history of the league have played 1,500 games.
You don't think McDavid ends up playing until he's 42?
Well, Ovi is going to play into his 40s and he's barely going to get to 1,500.
But he started.
And he's been a horse. He's barely missed any games.
Lockouts, and he started later. Hopefully McDavid avoids lockouts.
Yeah, see, Ovi didn't really start until his 20th year, right? Because he was a late birthday, and then they had the lockout. So I think 1,500 games is very hard, as Frank said, to do. But guys today are playing longer than ever before. That's just the truth, right? We're seeing that across the board. So I do think 1,500. Now, maintaining the points percentage is obviously what's going to be the hardest thing. Everybody eventually dips a little bit at some point, but I'm going to say 21 97.
21.97. Frank?
Oh my God, what a hammer answer with the 97. Come on. Jesus.
Well, if you're making a line, you want to pick one. Actually, it probably should have been 21.96.5, right? Because then people would go.
Yeah, there you go. There's your
if you're I'm going to pretend I'm a guy making the lines right now, Frank. You make the line to entice people.
If that's the line, I'm smashing the over.
Okay.
I think he ends up somewhere in the 2,300 point range.
It is crazy to think that like the 2,300 point range is like, yeah, that's high, and he'd still be 550 away from Gretzky, which is nuts. There you go, boys. That is a wrap on this week's edition of Fill in the Blank.
Well, who knows? Maybe in another 15 years with the advancements of technology and different things, McDavid might be a Gordie Howe of 2030 and playing till he's 50. Like, you never know. Like he's wired for hockey. So
it's just wild that he's like just a weird symmetry in Edmonton that he's going to be the 99th player to get to 1,000. That's odd.
Yeah. And so some numbers, Frank, I was looking up 1,000 points. So Mike Bossy, when he scored his 1,000 point, 4-point game. Merrill Lemieux did it, 3-point game. Gretzky needed 1 point. He got 6. So he actually had 1,005 points in his first 424 games. Like it's ridiculous what he did. McDavid will also be the 4th Oiler to do it. Curry and Messier each had 3-point games. These guys, and here's a fun little stat for you. McDavid, every milestone, 100, 200, 300 points, all the way up to 900, he's had multi-point games in every one of them, including 5 points last January against the Flyers when he got to 900 career points. Those elite players, Frank, like milestone numbers, everybody knows about. Like your 50th birthday, you have a big party, right? Like there's just something about numbers.
People like you.
If you're human nature and they have it. And McDavid, multi-point game is like the easiest wager ever tonight. And it's Nashville, who they beat for fun. And it doesn't make any sense. But McDavid, when you look at all the great players, when they're searching for that 1,000 points, a lot of the big gunners, man, they have big nights. And McDavid's best 2 games of the season have been his last 2 games.
Is there a guy that has 1,000 points that you're like, man, since you did some homework, like you were like, oh, I did not fully appreciate how good that guy's career was. Like, and for me, just scrolling through it, and I know this sounds absolutely funny to say since have spent so much time around him. Claude Giroux is closing in on 1,100 points.
Yeah.
And he will get there this year.
The one guy to me that really stood out was that Bobby Clark had over 1,200. Like Bobby Clark was a hell of a player and a little bit before my time. But man, when I look up his numbers, he was really good. And then the other guy, it's not so much 1,000, but Vinny Damphus had over 1,200 points too.
Yep.
And if you would have asked, I would have been like, what? So those were like Bobby Clark was tough and rugged, but he was really skilled as well, right? Like I'm sure, people, I know everybody talks about the slash and whatever, but
dude, he was the best player in the game for a while.
Oh,
for a period of time.
Yeah, no, he was really good. And, then you get into some guys like, I know Chicago fans will really like Stan Mikita, right? I know I talked to lots of guys who are from that era that believe Stan Mikita is highly underappreciated, just how good and how special of a player he was. And I know the older players, we don't talk about him as much, so maybe they get forgotten, but I've talked to players, fans and media people from those eras, and they're like, buddy, Stan Mikita was unreal.
Why do you think, not to enrage a Hall of Fame debate, but why do you think someone like, and I love him, he's such a prince of a man, but why do you think Joe Mullen was such an automatic Hall of Fame selection when you look at his numbers compared to
Alex McGillney,
Keith Tkachuk? Or, well, maybe not Tkachuk because he played more games, but yeah, McGillney would be a good one. Or I don't know.
Yeah, like I think Joey Mullen, really smart player. I do think the fact, he was a point a game guy, I think bang on, right? Wasn't he like 100.
He was like, yeah,
1,000.
one more point than game played.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So because you look at, this is a point of game guy, no question. It's a good question, honestly. Like, because he was good. He was never like great. He didn't wow you. He was just steady. I think he's a really smart player. And I think I think Joey Mullins was my understanding. I don't know Joey at all, but was very likable. And I think that personality
Such a good guy.
right? Like there's lots of people who Jeremy Roenick rubbed the wrong way. But if you're talking just straight up player, Jeremy Roenick, Joey Mullins, Jeremy Roenick is more entertaining, right? Did a lot of more physical, did a lot of other things that he probably should have been in there earlier than Joey Mullins. But I think the fact that
740 goal seasons or more, one-time 50 goal scorer, one-time 100-point player, played almost every year of the 80s, which was a high-scoring era, but won 3 cups.
Yeah. Yeah, like I think winning cups helps, but honestly, Frank, the longer we go, the winning cup thing has to be less of a factor because there's way more teams now.
But he was first ballot.
I know. It's good for him that he's in, but I don't have an answer for you. I'd love to know and you know what? It comes down to he got nominated at the right time. Because if a guy doesn't get nominated, and you're not, my understanding is they don't talk in advance. Okay, Frank, who are you nominating? Okay, I'll nominate someone else. But it's a good one. Like Keith Tkachuk.
Okay, so then let's spin it forward then. So we know that the class of eligible players for next season is pretty impressive.
Joe Thornton, Zdeno Chara, Duncan Keith. And there's another one. Oh, Carey Price.
So those 4 would close out the class. Do you agree that all 4 get in on the first ballot?
Yes, probably.
Okay.
Like Thornton and Chara and Keith, like Carey Price.
Dude, I see this. What we had this debate yesterday with Tyler on Daily Faceoff Live. To me, Carey Price is the instant lock of all of them.
Yeah. Well, I only say it because goalies historically have had a harder time getting in. That's what I wanted.
But goalies that win. So first off, winning the Hart Trophy makes you an automatic lock, pretty much.
Pretty much.
It does. Like in history, there's like maybe 3 or 4 in history that have won the Hart that aren't in. But a goalie winning the Hart, and his international resume, and going to the Cup final,
which of those other 3 would you say? Well, geez, I don't
none.
know.
I'm saying I think all 4. I'm saying if I were to order most likely to least likely to get in on first ballot, my order would be something like Carey Price is the most likely of those 4. Then it would be Joe Thornton. Then it would be Zdeno Chara. Then it would be Duncan Keith.
Yeah, I'd still have Joe first.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then here, that wasn't the most interesting part of the next class that I was thinking about. It's the next couple guys. Is Ryan Getzlaf a Hall of Famer?
Ooh, good question. God, that's a really good question. Like he was he was excellent player. I think he ultimately will get in, Frank, but he's not guy who's getting in like right away. I could see him, he might have to wait some time because he never had like high-end massive numbers.
See, I think you're sleeping on it a little bit because of how low the scoring era was. So 91 points in 08-09. Guess what the league leader had that season?
104?
92. No, I'm sorry. That year was 113.
Right.
So he was, let's see, points that year. Ryan Getzlaf was 6th. Okay.
Yeah.
It was the other season. 13-14. 87 points. How many do you think the league leader had?
Oh, was that the Jamie Benn year?
No, that was Sidney Crosby at 104. Getzlaf was 2nd.
Yeah.
And he
Okay.
finished
So
he finished second in Hart Trophy voting that year.
yeah. No, so in that from 09 to 14, he was a top 10 scorer in the NHL. I think he was 7th, maybe 6th, like Ovi and St. Louis and Crosby, Thornton were ahead of him. I'm not sure if both
He missed a
Sedins
bunch
were.
of games too.
Yeah, no. So yeah, he's
No, he was
probably
north of a point per game. He had 429 and 417 in that 6-year stretch.
I just look at it this way. At the peak of their games, peak Getzlaf, was it better than peak McGillney? And I think sometimes people forget that. And so to me, Ryan Getzlaf, I have no problem if he goes in. He shouldn't go in before McGillney.
Do the Olympic golds mean anything?
Not really. Not for me personally. Like, hey, you played on Canada, one of the best nations in the world, and you're a good player to get on Canada. But you know, there's guys that make the team who aren't Hall of Famers. They're just, you know, at that time, one of the best 22 guys in the country. Awesome. But I don't think that means you're a Hall of Famer.
I think he's a Hall of Famer.
But it'll help his cause. And I do think he gets in. I just don't think he's he's not a lock, right? Like, as we just talked about, the guys that we all just mentioned, Keith, Chara, Price, and Thornton, there was no hesitation. But I think
he was one of the top 5 players at his position for more than a decade.
Yeah, at center ice, yeah, I could argue with that, right? You have Crosby and Malkin, Thornton were better, and then you'd have a debate. Like, was Ryan Getzlaf a better center than Henrik Sedin?
Probably not. But those guys are first ballot locks.
Yeah. I look at their career number, like their career numbers, Frank. They had like a 7-8 year. You look at their first 5 years in the league, right? They had
he just passes the eye test for me, like he does. Yeah. Like when I think of players,
I would take if you're asking me to build a team, Frank, I'm taking Getzlaf over Henrik Sedin, me personally. So that's why if Henrik Sedin's in, then Getzlaf's in. I just don't think he gets in right away. Might get in 2026, possibly. I'd have to look at who the competition is, but when I look at a guy like Getzlaf and I look at a guy like McGillney, at their peak, everything and different positions, I'd still take McGillney.
It was a good pod.
Yeah. Frankie, how many points do you think in game 1 or 0.1000 tonight? 1, 2, 3 plus?
It would just be max chaos for him to get 0, but I'm going to say he gets 3.
3, yeah. It's kind of crazy, and that's how good of a player is that a lot of people are thinking 3 points. Like 3 points in any game is hard. And we're like, well, he'll just get 3 points. That's how good he is. Like Crosby in his prime, lots of those elite players. It's a big deal. So, and you talked earlier about the secondary market. I wonder if that goes up, because this is only the second time a guy's done it at home. Gretzky did it in '84. So 40 years later, they could see a player scores 1,000 point on home ice. As you said, as the 99th player. Like, it is kind of weird. That's the rundown, brought to you by Fountain Tire. Get in before December 14th, or you can get 4 tires, save $225, including Goodyear at Fountain Tire.
What's up, hockey fans? If you enjoyed that video, then you need to be hitting the subscribe button right here at Daily Faceoff. Exclusive interviews and analysis from our hockey insider Frank Saravalli, fantasy updates from Brock Sagan, and a daily live show at noon Eastern, Monday through Friday. You don't want to miss any of the fantastic content, so hit that subscribe button.